Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Brilliantly Resilient Live. I am so energized and excited because we're talking about finances, my worst nightmare. Well, here's the thing. Here is the thing. This is so exciting because look, I'm honest. I'm Kristen Smedley. And finances make me have panic attacks. And maybe a lot of you are in that same boat that I live in every day because spreadsheets give me a headache, all that good stuff, right? I just like it to magically appear and make itself work out. So when we decided to have this incredible financial guru on that I'm going to introduce you to in a second, I was like, I'm going to have a lot of coffee for that one. And then I saw that he's a surfer and a musician. And I'm like, okay, this is Kristen and Mary Fran style of talking finances.
Yeah, that was my buy-in. The whole surfer music thing, I was like, all right, at least we can veer off in that direction when my head starts to explode.
So
let's bring him in.
You know you're in for a cool ride today. We have Morgan H. Smith Jr., ladies and gentlemen, a financial guru, as we call him. In the rest of the world, he is known as a certified financial planning professional. We're sticking with guru. Morgan, I am so excited that you are here today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, ladies. How are you?
Oh, that's right.
And
you're out on the West Coast. So we've got
right.
Both coasts of the United States represented here. How about them apples? Good stuff. So let's, where do we begin? I guess we have to address the financial stuff first, but we have to get into the fun stuff too. You let us know where you would like to begin. Let's talk about your book for a second.
Yeah.
Is this your first book that you've come out with just now?
The first book that I published. Like a lot of us, I've got a couple sitting in my drawer, and this is the first one that let me put it this way. This is the first one I felt compelled to bring out to the world. And Generation Squeeze, it's this idea that in our lives, we've got a lot of pressure on us, just as adults with kids, our careers, social pressures, finances, and everything else. And that's the bottom up pressure. And then there comes a time in most of our lives where all of a sudden our parents become sick and ill and decline and eventually pass away. And that's the pressure from the top. And there's a paradigm shift there, and you start having to become a parent to your parent. And so that's the squeeze behind the book, Generation Squeezed, a holistic guide to taking care of aging parents. So I went through it with my parents, and I realized that I was meeting a whole bunch of people going through the same thing. And they were kind of lost, didn't know what to do. They were scared. And my goal was to educate people, to help them transform this journey from being one that does have the potential of destroying families, making siblings fights. Ultimately, you can end up in court with your family and lose your job, to something that is very positive, can give you and your family a peace of mind and things like that. And so there's a lot of technical and administrative aspects in it, like how do you settle the estate, looking at investments for your parents, some practical stuff that you might not know about digital vaults and password things and durable power of attorneys and all these things that you're going to need to take care of. But I wanted to bring the emotional and behavioral aspect into it. So how do you prepare yourself emotionally? How do you approach siblings, having family meetings? And having a long history of practicing and meditation and practicing as a Buddhist monk in India has given me particular insights in going through this process. And so I just hope I can help people. And kind of wrapping this up with your question, look at investing and finances. It tends to be, at the end of the day, an emotional, you end up making emotional decisions when you think you're making logical decisions. And I discuss that in my book.
That is so on point, because if for no reason other than, as Kristen said at the beginning, many of us, I won't include the whole world in this, but many of us, when we think about finances, like I cross between my hair going on fire and wanting to dive under the bed. Like it's those total extremes. And it's something that is supposed to be logical, as you said, because it's facts and figures. And yet we bring this emotional component and this emotional baggage because money is how we fuel our lives. So I guess you can't really separate the two, right?
Right. And so there was a study done by a neuroscientist a while ago, and he studied high functioning people in society. I mean, these were people who were leaders and you know, executives and things like that. And they had brain damage to their emotional centers. So the result of that was they couldn't feel any emotions. They couldn't feel sadness or happiness or anything like that. But another result of it was that they weren't able to make decisions anymore, or they had a very difficult time making, so they could look at a closet and understand, you know, what the different colors were and what the weather was like and where they were going, but they just couldn't make a decision. So it really supports this idea that even though we think we're making logical decisions based on numbers, that it's the emotional center in our brains that's driving our decision, no matter how logical we think we're going to get. So those factors you talked about, fear and maybe greed or overexuberance, that the cycles that people go through, they really tend to make bad decisions during those time periods when it comes to investing and things like that.
My gosh. So how do you balance that? I mean, how do you guide people? First of all, I love the word that you put, holistic guide, into the title, because again, when we think about your background, well, part of your background, because excuse me for saying this, but I think you're schizophrenic. I mean, you studied as a Buddhist monk, and you're a surfer.
Mary Grant's the charming host of the show.
I am. I'm just sorry, no filters. But you're a financial planner who was also studied as a Buddhist monk, who is a surfer, who has released 5 musical albums, who writes books. I'm like, my husband thought he had a hard time handling my 12 personalities. This is amazing. Number one. But I love the idea that you are looking at this, and I think we're at a point in life where we are all realizing that everything is connected. And when you try to separate these things into boxes, it doesn't work.
Yes, so I write a little bit about, for example, in the flying world, when I was a fighter pilot.
Oh, I forgot that one. He was a fighter pilot, everybody. I forgot that.
F-14s, we have checklists, and you know, there are rules and procedures that are literally written in blood, and there's a lot of decisions out there and things that we think we're approaching logically. And I just realized, in order to help people really transform their lives, yes, you've got to have that warrior aspect to you, but you have to have that emotional intelligence to really set things in place as you move forward. And you can't just look at things from one side or the other. It has to be a holistic perspective.
Wow.
I just find the whole idea fascinating. And when you just said help people, I think maybe in a phrase, that's the tie-in. Because if you were looking at this completely on a factual, you know, facts and figures basis, helping people wouldn't enter the equation. But the very fact that even enters it in any way indicates, once again, that all of these things are intertwined. So what do you consider at this point in the game your primary work, so to speak? What is your goal with all of this?
You know, that's a very good question, because I think people do need to, as a financial advisor, I need to be a leader to people and families.
Mm-hmm.
And this not only includes the person themselves, but guiding them along to think about intergenerational issues. And part of that is thinking strategically. Think about, because you can think tactically on what's going on today. You know, I've got to do this podcast, and I've got to pay the bills, but you've got to step back and look around a little and think strategically in your life. So my work right now, I really feel that this is one of the reasons the universe had me go through these experiences of being a caretaker for my parents, who have since passed away. My father died of dementia, my mother of lung cancer, and being a financial advisor, having that expertise for over 15 years. and being having decent skills in communicating. That is my mission from the book and what I'm doing. Otherwise, my mission is right now is to raise my 6-year-old son to be the best man that he can be. And then I guess the third leg to that, as a financial advisor, again, is to take care of my clients and make sure that they're going to be taken care of for years and decades to come with their finances.
So let's dive in a little bit to the current situation. What, as people are panicking and standing on ledges saying, oh my gosh, my business is closed, or I've had to pivot, I'm not bringing in the revenue. It was a little helpful for some of the stimulus stuff that came out. Do you have any like just off the top of your head or top couple of tips to give folks right now to, as you're saying, emotional intelligence, don't freak out, don't make decisions out of panic, but we're all there's a lot of us panicking.
Yeah, so look, in the heart of this, the advice I gave was, it's going to be a cash flow play for people and businesses, i.e., what does that mean? Everyone's going to have to pay their mortgages, pay their leases, pay their employees. And the response to this was not a natural response. It was an artificial response created by the policies of our government and social system, right? So the key to this whole thing is getting through things from a cash flow perspective. And if you can make it through that, then from a long-term investing standpoint, if history is any indication, your investments are going to be just fine if you do things right. So you look back on this 10 years from now, you're going to go, God, that stunk. I didn't like that, but God, I'm okay. So my first word of advice is still at this point, if you can be very aggressive in pursuing renegotiation of leases, mortgage modifications, and renegotiating any kind of obligations that you have, and going to mortgages. I think a lot of people, my sense is that mortgage companies are throwing out mortgage forbearance like candy. What's a forbearance? A forbearance is, okay, you don't have to pay for 3 months, say, your mortgage, but at the end of that 3 months, are you mad? You have to come up with that 3 months that you didn't pay, and that month's due for the mortgage. Who's going to magically come up with that money?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
One of my recommendations is to, if you really need it, instead of going for a forbearance, try and negotiate for a loan modification where they can suspend some payments and tack that on to the back end. And that's a little nuance that I think would help people now.
You know, it's really interesting that you say that, and I'm scribbling away furiously here because I think a couple of things struck me. First of all, the one thing that Kristen and I always talk about is put your hand up and ask. At this point, you need to go to these people, you need to ask for help. However, the second part of that is there is still a language or a parlance in those areas that if you're not well versed financially, you might not understand. So when somebody says you don't have to pay your mortgage for 3 months, you better find out what's on the back end of that. Like, do you have to come up with that 3 months all at one time, or is there an extension onto the other end of your mortgage where they're extending it by 3 months? So you don't stop with the answer that you just wanted to hear. You got to go further and ask for the details, right?
You know, there's a great analogy in music, and one of my favorite bands, The Clash, referenced it in one of their songs. But it's this idea, like, you're an up and coming band, and somebody comes to you and go, hey, do you want a record contract? And most kids are all, yeah, we want a record contract. Well, the answer is it depends. You know, the devil's in the details.
Yes.
So, and I think the other thing to remember is one of the biggest things that the academics tells us about investing is something we know intuitively. And what is that? Nobody can predict the future, right? So, but the problem is psychologically and emotionally, we want to think that we've got some special system or some secret sauce, or that's going to be able to tell me what the best companies to invest in. Or we want to find that guy that can predict the future. And that's the hardest thing for investors to remember, is that nobody can predict the future. So if you've got somebody out there saying, well, look, this is what's happened with the stimulus package, interest rates are going here, and these are the industries that are going to do. Nobody knows. So you've got to underpin your investment philosophy with acknowledgement of that if you really want to take away some of the risks that other people take.
So I guess what I'm hearing in some ways is be aggressive when it comes to reaching out and asking for help for yourself, but be cautious when it comes to making certain bigger changes because we just don't know what's going to happen next.
Look, here's my big takeaway from this whole crisis we're going through. You've got to have a plan before the crisis hits. And so,
who had that?
Yeah.
Who had that?
Yeah.
So can we make that? It's actually an interesting question though. So we didn't. So can we backtrack? Can we, like, what do we do now if we didn't have a plan?
Okay. So, okay. Now you and I are talking about two different things. I'm talking about families. So
Okay.
individual families with their finances, you want to have an investment plan that takes into account some worst case scenarios. And part of that includes having a cash reserve set aside, for example, in case we hit scenarios like this. So you have a lower probability of tapping into your investments that may be down at the moment. So when I talk about
what a good cash reserve would be, is there like a formula if you make this, or you need like 2 months of living?
Well, I'll tell you the factors to think about. Number one, is there one spouse working or is there two spouses working?
Okay.
And that can shorten the need for the emergency fund. The other factor is, are they in the same industry? I mean, do you have two doctors or something similar to that case? And then what you do is you look at your cash flow need on a monthly basis. So let's say you need $10,000 a month to live, and you had one working spouse in the household. You know, generally you see anywhere from 6 months to 12 months of cash reserve set aside. But every case is on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
So
Okay.
don't consider this advice out there for people listening. You really have to look at your own particular case.
Okay. Okay. I interrupted what else you were saying there. Sorry.
Oh, I forgot. So I couldn't forget. I think I made my point. We were talking about being prepared, and you asked the question, my friend, I don't think anybody was prepared, and you were talking about kind of the government, and sure, you could argue that, but from a family standpoint, I would say that all of our families who were clients were prepared, and doesn't mean they're not impacted, but they were prepared.
So you can, I mean, I guess going forward, because I don't want to say it's too late, because I don't ever believe it's too late for anybody to make significant changes that are helpful. But I think going forward, you talked about these two words keep coming back into my head, tactics and strategy. So what are some tactical moves that people can make in line with some kind of a strategy, like moving forward with this kind of stuff? Is there anything there? I'm starting from zero. Just let's assume that. Where do I go to begin? Because I think people, first of all, assume they're always starting from zero and maybe further along than they think they are, but they don't know how to put the pieces together. So where do I start?
Now, are you talking about from life in general, from a business perspective, or personal finance standpoint?
You tell me, Morgan, because I could use help across the board.
Man's life. Let's just hone in on one spot though, because we could be here all day. Let's see.
So no, I think I'm talking about, about finances, because
Personal
so many people have had the rug so completely pulled out from under them here, and yet there may be at least some place that they can start to kind of come out of this and make a plan for the future.
Okay, so I was going to say, from a kind of business life standpoint, what you've done, what I understand that what you've done is a perfect example of pivoting and looking at a scenario that is causing a lot of stress for a lot of people. But remember, in investing in life and everything, every crisis creates opportunities as well. And so good on you for recognizing that and reacting. And that's the resilience aspect of it. We have to be resilient. From a personal finance and planning standpoint, look, we have to understand that we don't know what we don't know. And if you think about our stories in life, a lot of times we make decisions because we're too scared to talk about things. We think we know everything. You know, there's other emotions going on with that. So really what you need to do is you need to get good advice, right? We all need mentors, our parents, people, you know, whatever folks in the community we meet. And now we can get online and listen to folks like you and get some, you know, capture some pearls. So the first thing to think about in my mind is, where do you get advice? Who are you getting advice from? And when I'm evaluating scenarios, whether it be advice or something else, you follow the money and you can kind of understand what the motivators are. In our world, a lot of advice comes from environments that have a lot of conflicts of interest. So people may be saying, hey, this is a great something for you. Just so happens they're getting paid a lot of commissions to sell you that something, right? So the first thing I would say is find a fee-only fiduciary financial advisor. And a fee only means that that advisor is not getting paid commissions to sell you something. They're only getting paid by one person, and that's you, the client. So you can trust them to be a fiduciary and be on your side. So really the first thing is, look, go out and get advice, talk to people, but make sure you're scrutinizing who you're getting advice from, because some people don't have, as you said, the educated nuance to differentiate what's good advice and what's bad advice.
Yeah.
And to put it very practical, don't ask your broke uncle for advice on what to do right now.
Hey, Uncle
He's
Bob,
not the guy.
I got $1 million here.
Where do you think I should put this, Uncle Joe? All right, so now you used a word that I want to use in relation to you. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about this other side of your life where you are so, your left brain, right brains are totally equal in development, clearly, because holy cow.
You are right. I've done the psychological profiles and I'm right in the middle. So I tell people it's a blessing and it's a curse. It's great to be engaged in many aspects, but the problem people like me can have is focusing and making sure they don't get too scattered in life, because oftentimes if you do that, you go nowhere.
Oh, maybe
hear that, Kristen?
Maybe I'm
You've just been diagnosed. Boom.
Look at that. So I'm like a financial guru and LL Cool J all in one brain. Look at me.
So, but let's actually, I do want to talk about that a little bit, because I would imagine that because you're, I don't even know which side of the brain it is, whichever side deals with the financial stuff, that is highly focused on something that's completely different than the thing that feeds you, say, when you're out surfing or creating music or whatever. But do you find that you need both pieces?
Yes. And I guess the thing what I've learned is, so for example, there are people that need something really bad in life and they get really depressed if they don't have it. I've learned to be able to let go of things that are very important to me. So for example, surfing, I've been surfing for a long time, and there have been moments in my life, I've moved to Austin, Texas for a few years, and I didn't have surfing in my life, but I was at peace and happy with it. So there are things that you're compelled to do. The danger is when that's gone, allowing it to cause you unhappiness, and that's essentially very intertwined with the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, but I won't go there.
Oh, you can go there.
That's another conversation. Well, that's another
conversation. Episode on that, but
yeah, we'll do a whole other episode on that, because we're going to have you back, because now I need to know everything about that.
But yes, for example, I started another band with some really good friends several years ago, and once you start writing, you Keith Richards said, you just put up your antenna and God, you catch the whispers or the melodies that are coming from God is what Keith Richards said. And he's one of my favorite guitarists. And it's true. You start, once your mind starts focusing on one area and you start working on it and exercising it, and things just come in, and you really get compelled, and you got to watch out because it can become an obsession. So people that have obsessions, they can accomplish great things, but it can also destroy their lives and relationships. So balance.
Yeah. Balance, yeah, which is where the whole Buddhist monk thing comes in. So who are we talking to now? Which one of your personalities are we talking to now? I'm just trying to keep it all straight.
Again, the charm and the love from the very friend.
It's all connected.
It's all connected.
I want to go back even further though, because the beginning of all this, you were a Navy pilot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And is that what you wanted your whole life to be? Like, did you know for a long time you were going to do that? Where did that come from? Because that's pretty elite.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Coronado, and there's a lot of military here. Navy SEALs trained down here. My dad was a Navy pilot. A lot of the parents were pilots, and it was in our blood. But quite frankly, I got out of high school. I had no plan. I was surfing, playing in a band, and I realized what happened was normally my father got me surfboards or skateboards for my birthday, and on my 18th birthday, which was in June, I was saying, hey, Dad, I want this, I want this board that's in at the surf shop. And he got me a tool belt because I worked for him construction part-time, and I did not like it. He fired me 3 times one summer. That was the moment where I go, yeah, I go, oh my God.
That is one either clever dad, or that is one lucky coincidence that you were like, here's your future, son, and you're like, oh no.
And I've always wondered that. I never got that answer from him. I think he was really kind of excited to get me involved in it because he was a contractor, and that was the moment where I go, okay, I'm going to focus. I got a scholarship at the University of San Diego as a NROTC scholarship. And my undergrad was computer science, and then I got commissioned, went to flight school, and then came out and flew. I was at F-14 Rio at VF-124 and 51 at NAS Miramar, Fighter Town, USA.
I'm sure his disappointment at you not picking up a hammer was mitigated by the fact that you became a fighter pilot.
Well, the grin on his face when I go, hey, Dad, I got this scholarship, full ride at a private university. He was really happy. And that was part of my motivation too. I just didn't want him to pay for my school.
That's amazing.
That is cool. What a cool story.
Yeah, that's a great story. I mean, I really think we could probably go on and talk to you. I have to admit, initially I was slightly terrified because I just thought I'm going to need a drink after this because it's going to be about money and I'm going to cry. But this has been an enlightening and a delightful conversation because you really helped me to, first of all, I think you take the panic out of it. So thank you for your calm, rational delivery here and allowing us to recognize that it is, in fact, okay to acknowledge, in fact, essential to acknowledge that your emotions are tied into your financial decisions.
Yeah, and a lot of people are really in denial. Again, they're in denial that there's not somebody out there that can predict the future and find those perfect investments in there. And they're in denial that despite all their spreadsheets and their logical analysis, that emotions aren't part of the decision-making process. And the science and the research tells us otherwise. And at the end of the day, it's their choice to either kind of choose to accept it or not.
Yeah. So then to go back to then your other suggestion about making sure you find someone who, when you're having someone advise you, I would say you probably also then have to have somebody who's going to at least understand a little bit what your emotional makeup kind of is, so that you can kind of form that partnership when it comes to making those decisions, so they will recognize the place from which you are operating initially.
Absolutely. And I go back to that foundation. There's 2 sides. You have to have the logical side and the emotional, behavioral. Who's ever given you advice needs to understand things, certainly at a fundamental level, because I've got to be able, if I'm talking to you about finances and most people will say, well, I've got this money and this is what I want to do. I've got to peel back that onion and say, well, why do you want to do it? What is your relationship to money? Does it make you fearful? Do you think it's an opportunity for you? And you end up, and then you add the dynamic of a spouse. And then oftentimes spouses are on the same page, and you become somewhat of a marriage counsel. And then there are kids involved, and then this whole thing expands, and you find out there's a lot of things that in our minds that we're thinking about subconsciously about what to do with our money. And at the end of the day, sometimes we just kind of get, analysis paralysis, and we kind of shut down and don't do anything. So I'm there to help lead people to make decisions in a really comfortable and encouraging environment.
I love that. You do make it comfortable, because it's uncomfortable for me. And now I'm completely comfortable about it. So I'm going to send you all my stuff, figure out my financial plan, and we'll be good to go.
So to that end, as much as I hate to wrap this up, I do want people to know where they can find you, where they can find the book. So tell us where we can reach out to you.
So the website is Gen, Gen Squeezed, SQUEEZED.com, gensqueezed.com. And I believe I've also got the Generation Squeeze URL to point you there. But on the website, it's got a little bit about the book. There's a link to buy it, and it's available on pretty much every e-book outlet, Kindle, Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, and you can also buy a paperback book. So there's a link on the page to buy it. And there's also a resource page on the website, for certain things that people in those circumstances taking care of their parents can look at and think about. So anyways, Gen Squeezed, GenSqueezed.com.
Awesome. And when we are finally able to get out to the West Coast again, you can give us surf lessons, and I will be so much better than Mary Fran at it.
Oh, no, you won't. I actually already have a bodysuit because my son gave me one. So I already have the equipment.
So there's that.
Well, I've been known to give surf lessons, and I just gave my son surf lessons yesterday. So come on.
Yeah, he'll
all right.
Well, like probably blow right past us like my kids did when I did surfing once. Right. Anyway, thank you everybody for tuning into another Brilliantly Resilient live episode with our new buddy and surfing instructor and financial planner, Morgan. And be sure to go check out the book. And I actually can't wait to check out this book, because I feel like it's going to ease me into all of this, and I'm not so nervous about it. And also, while you're out there checking out resources, go on brilliantlyresilient.net/freebies. And we've got a cool one for you there to help get that mindset reset going if you're feeling way too stuck and need a little jump start this week. And then, Mary Fran, when should they tune in again? When will we be on again?
I think tomorrow.
We're live every day, people. See ya.